Hey there. Welcome to the Gyro Step, a Milwaukee Bucks podcast, proudly a part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network and GSPN. I'm Ty Windisch, and I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Rohan, Katti, and we're both very excited to be joined by a special guest as well with coaching, the number one news item right now. We're ignoring all the terrible fake trades at the moment in the Bucks content sphere. We had to bring back Brad Fischer, UWO Coach Fischer, coach of the UWO women's team. Another very successful season for Coach Brad since last time we spoke. Brad and then Rohan, how's it going?
Good to see you guys. I'd rather have better circumstances talking about finals adjustments or second round adjustments, I guess, at this point, but I'm excited to talk.
I'm doing great. I mean, it's we have a lead company here, top 25 all-time winning percentage coach on. So, you know, it's good company, and we're lucky to have you, Brad.
We got in here with Brad before the Bucks scoop him up, and then, you know, Bucks are a little tighter on media. I don't know if we'll be able to get Brad on the pod if he is hired by the Milwaukee Bucks, but we got him now while the search is just starting. So, you know, unless you've been living under a rock or somehow didn't read the title of this pod or listen to the last episode, Adam and Jordan did a terrific retrospective on the news the day it happened. The Bucks have dismissed Coach Mike Budenholzer. I believe it was Thursday last week that it actually happened. There's been no hire yet. I think it will be a while, which is a smart move. There's been no news on, you know, where Bud is going to end up next. That will probably take some time too. There's a couple openings right now. There could be a couple more before the end of the summer. And before we get into, I guess, the crux of the pod, which is not as flippant as maybe it sounds, right? Like, how can the Bucks get better after firing Mike Budenholzer? There are anti-Bud people who will say, oh, bring in anyone, have anyone do it and they'll be better. Yeah, probably not, but we'll get to that. First, I do want to, and I'm glad Adam and Jordan did a really good job of this, I think, examine like Bud's Bucks tenure, because it was probably the best 5-year stretch in franchise history, taking into account regular season and playoff success. You know, certainly right up there with the 80s that never had the championship high, but a whole decade of prolonged success. And of course, the 70s when they won a championship, but that team just wasn't together for all that long total. And Brad, I'd love to hear from you first on I guess, you know, where did your mind go when the news broke? You know, clearly it was something that was not totally unexpected. There was the way the season ended, you know, some of the reporting that came out pretty early from Shams Charania and others. But still, I mean, it still hit differently actually seeing it, knowing that the Bucks basically went from a joke for 20 years to a perennial contender basically as soon as Bud walked in the door.
Yeah, and I think because it happened immediately, we assumed it was easy, and we assumed all it took was moving on from Jason Kidd, and I think they found the perfect guy at the perfect time. I think, and people have talked about unlocking Brook Lopez, but you know, Giannis was becoming who he was becoming, but if someone comes in and puts in a 4-out offense and messes around with, you know, someone in the post, brings in the wrong post player, and I think that's part of the conversation too, is how good a job he and John Horst did of working together to build a roster that fit for how they wanted to play. And because it just popped, we all kind of thought, well, you know, we just got an NBA coach now, and Jason Kidd wasn't that, but there was other guys that interviewed for that job that could have been 45-win teams for 3 years, and Giannis would have been out the door. So I think they found the perfect guy, obviously, for him to make Brook Lopez into what he was and contribute to that. And then winning was just an every night thing, and we had never seen it. We may not see it again in the same way. I mean, they made the regular season irrelevant, which was never the case in Milwaukee. And I think on the way out the door, I was just sad. And obviously everything that happened to him, you know, we've all talked about trying to think about doing our own jobs with that circumstance. And, you know, I hope time doesn't pass where we continue. I still read how anyone, you know, would have 3 championships, Bo would have 3 championships, or if he went to, you know, if we had someone else during this season, they would have won it. It's just not that easy. And I hope people can respect how great a job he did and how he was perfect at the perfect time.
Yeah, especially because, like you mentioned, like a coach like Jason Kidd is not an NBA level coach, especially like we saw in Milwaukee. That guy's an NBA coach still. Like, he's actually the head coach of the Dallas Mavericks for who knows for how long. It'd be really funny if Dallas fired Jason Kidd to hire Mike Budenholzer and they just go through the same thing again.
They'd win 55 games. I'll tell you that. Like they would go and win a bunch of games.
It would be absolutely incredible. But those type of coaches exist, and that's why, like you mentioned earlier, Ty, you can't just bring anyone in.
Yeah.
You can't, like, there is, like, while it is like a high level job, there's only 30 of these jobs that exist in the entire world. There's levels to it. There's absolutely levels to it. Like, you can have high level coaching, you can have low level coaching. Like, it all depends on the personality, the roster, the team. It's a multitude of factors, like, coming together to make one product. It's not just one thing resulting in like a bunch of wins. It's coaching, it's personalities, it's roster construction, it's everything put together. So it was a perfect match with John Horst, Mike Budenholzer, Giannis, like you mentioned, Brad. The roster around Giannis, it really truly matters. Like you mentioned, he transforms like Brook Lopez into a guy you can be. Pat Connaughton became like an actual NBA rotation, like high level rotation player. Like you see what he's done with like Wing University in Atlanta, and see what he could do in Milwaukee. It was just a great era of Milwaukee Bucks basketball that I feel like, because of this and because of the sour ending, is going to go underappreciated. Like, sure, it ends with a first round exit and Bud getting fired, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't highs along the way. Just one bad moment doesn't make the entire journey. Like, it's a 5-year journey. It doesn't make that irrelevant. It doesn't make that like it didn't happen. That happened. One of the main reasons the Milwaukee Bucks have a title is because of Mike Budenholzer. And that cannot be forgotten. That cannot get lost to the wayside.
Well, and I think to something Brad said pretty early on was also he's the reason they have a chance to have a second act with Giannis. Because I do think maybe Giannis would have stayed no matter what in any circumstance. I think probably not. Like I think there had to be, and obviously this is not sourced because Giannis wouldn't put this. I wouldn't believe him if he did say it right, but I think there had to be the right architecture built around him that he felt like he could win by the time the Supermax came up. And I've always thought, since really the championship postseason, that one of the best Bud things was the culture that he helped put in. And of course, the players are integral. You can't have, no coach can just like snap their fingers and culture's there, but their role in it is vital. And like someone like Jason Kidd clearly is probably not the greatest at doing that. I think Bud is the exact opposite in that department. And I think they had a culture and a culture of winning, which again, like if you're 20-62 every year, you can be the greatest guys ever. Things are going to go sour. I mean, you have to be winning as well, I think, for that to happen. Both of those ingredients were there. I mean, they had a great team. They were aggressive in their moves. I mean, they got Drew Holiday right before that too. But they had been like basically the best team in the league for 2 straight seasons. And so it was clear, like, okay, they need to figure something out in the playoffs. But there was a good enough reason, there was probable cause for Giannis to think, yeah, I think they can do it. Like, I think we're pretty close. And they were. They went and won a title right after he did it, right? So I think clearly, in addition to what was actually done, in a lot of ways, whatever happens next, I think is going to be because of Bud. In a much more real way. There were people who said, oh, like they do this with Mark Jackson and Kerr too, right? Like Mark Jackson developed the Warriors, Jason Kidd developed the Bucks and Giannis, and they're nothing without them. They had some role. I'm not going to say they had no role whatsoever, but I think that's like kind of ludicrous. I think clearly there were important things that were toggled, and that's what made all the difference. I think, Kerr's contract is up after this year. We'll see what happens in this series and with him. Both places, the only reason that there could be an extension of winning is because of Kerr and Bud. And I think they belong in the same company. Kerr has many more titles. He also had Stephen Curry and Kevin Durant, and a little bit of a different situation there, as good as the Bucks have been, as great as the Bucks have been. But I do think what Bud established is the only reason that Giannis is still here. And, despite what Windhorst and ESPN says, it seems to be here for a while still. And the only reason that we can even ask this question, because I think if Bud wasn't as great as he was, playoff shortcomings aside, that now we're just looking at like, okay, we don't have a pick again, and Giannis is gone, and we suck, and everything is terrible. So I think part of the legacy should also be, if anything else does happen great after this, it's because of Bud too. And of course, winning more than any other team in the regular season, winning a championship, being a great team all around, all of that as well. for my money, I would say the greatest coach in Milwaukee Bucks franchise history. And I agree, Rohan, people may forget, people may look down on it. I think in 10 years or so, hopefully 15 or 20 years, we'll be looking back like, damn, I miss those Bud days. Oh man, we only won 60 games and went to the conference finals. Like, oh, we might be looking at that like, oh, I would kill to have that season right now in the post-Giannis era. But Brad, your thoughts on, I guess, carrying it forward and Bud's importance in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first year that he was hired, they were a 45 or 46 win over-under type team. So, I mean, people thought, okay, they'll get a couple games better, but they were a 7 seed. And I'm a firm believer in the process of having to go, I mean, not to get into Giannis's stuff, but I mean, I am a firm believer in the process of, having to kind of climb your way through and have ups and downs and advanced rounds in the playoffs and learns what that means. And he skipped multiple steps in year one. He went right from, the Joe Prunty finish of, game 7 of the year before as a 7 seed, right to the number 1 seed and playing in a conference final and having the pressure for the first time since 2001, the pressure for the first time in a Bucks franchise and being a favorite to go to an NBA Finals. And even 2001, they weren't the favorite when it all shook out. So, he skipped those steps. And so I think back, like, what if that was a 46-7 win team and they get bounced in the second round? And then do they go to 52 the next year and then get beat again? Then Giannis probably is out the door. And I think that skipping those steps right to contender for all 5 years, regardless of how the 5 years ended, one of them gave you a championship, puts a heck of a target on the next coach. And I think they said on the low post with Eric this weekend was, they're kind of in a NBA Finals championship or bust right off the bat in year one, and that's where we start talking about new coaches. That's a tough spot for someone who's never been in that seat before. That's why I'm kind of a firm believer that they're going to have to find someone who's been in a finals before, likely as a head coach, to have the ability to get this team right to that spot, because there's not going to be a huge leash for anybody next year.
I think this is a good segue. Oh, Rohan, what do you got?
No, I was just because the first point you made was amazing about them being like a 45 win favorite. Because I remember the year before they hired Bud, everyone was saying, I think the over under was at like 46.5 or 47.5. Yeah. And I was like, this team's like, bet on this team. Like, I'm not going to encourage betting, but like the over is hitting on that because there was just so much low hanging fruit. Yeah. And we knew that Bud was just a guy, like an ultimate floor raiser. Like he had to teach this team how to play like organized basketball, basically. And they were still like a 40-win team. So it was just, like he took this team and he gave them the fundamentals. And you mentioned like a gradual progression, even though they didn't go through that gradual progression in the regular season. It's almost like they did that in the postseason. Like they had their growth. And even though they went to the conference finals their first year, that their first series was a joke. Apologies to the Pistons, but that was a joke. The Celtics were imploding thanks to Kyrie Irving. So it's like those weren't like real series. And then they got their first real test in the conference finals against Toronto, and they had to go through those growing pains. And then you face a team like Miami in the bubble, like you go through these growing pains. And then eventually you can get to the mountaintop and win a title. So even though they did, like, you do have to go through those growing pains. You're absolutely right.
I was just going to say, and I think that's a good point. I almost think people view floor raiser as a pejorative. I don't think it is. I mean, I think that's what you want from your coach probably. And there's only so much ceiling I think an NBA head coach is going to be able to pull out of a team. I mean, if you don't have a Giannis, Curry, LeBron kind of guy, I mean, especially in those circumstances. But certainly I think that just speaks to being a quality coach and putting in, and also over the 5 years, being more malleable than I think Bud gets credit for. I mean, the defense changed a lot, especially this past season. The offense, probably a little slower to change. I think ultimately, as we'll get into, that's what we're going to look for a lot from the next coach is tweaking that more, because I think that was the end. I mean, the regular season, it was normally fine. This last year was the only one it wasn't as good, but they basically had 1.5 ball handler for the first half of the season. So even then, I wasn't that uptight about how the offense looked in the regular season. The playoff offensive rating, though, has been middle of the pack or worst. basically every season since the first year when, as you said, Rohan, they blitz through the Pistons in round 1, and then they end up romping through the Celtics too. So that number probably a little skewed, certainly a lot worse against Toronto, the series that really mattered, than it was in their 8-1 start to that playoffs. But I think it's a good transition to talk about what we're looking from the next coach. So John Horst spoke on Friday in a conference call with reporters. One question directly asked was, does a candidate need NBA head coaching experience or championship experience? Horst said, I don't think so. That could change. He also made it clear that they're early in the process, and it seems like they're just trying to cast a very wide net, which I think is smart and a good idea generally. But I know, Brad, you had mentioned you do want to see someone who's been there before, at least in some avenue. Do you think, looking around the league, I guess, just at some recent successful coaches, Nurse obviously was an assistant who was raised and was able to do the thing. Also, I think overlooked. I mean, there was a different variable that changed from the last year of Raptors basketball to that one. Yeah. Kawhi Leonard added probably, has a lot to do with. I think I can drop the probably, has a lot to do with that as well.
Marc Gasol.
Yeah, I mean, just a whole different team. And I think you look at Steve Kerr was just like, I didn't think that was a good hire at the time, to be honest. I mean, kind of came from like front office / broadcasting and was trusted to do it. So those guys didn't have the head coaching experience. They made it work. But why do you think for this team in particular, it should be someone who's been in the head chair before?
Yeah, I think it's the circumstances of this team more than anything. I think you're right. I think if you're thinking about trying to find who has the best chance to be great, that person may not have been a head coach yet. I feel like regardless of how you kind of look at Giannis' situation, this team is going to be better in no matter what. And I think you're going to have to convince whoever's back of that veteran group that this guy is going to make you better than what you already have, which is a really good coach. And I think even with Bud getting fired, and even if the players that Giannis, was ready to move on from him, I don't think anyone would say he wasn't a really good NBA head coach. And I think it's just going to be hard for someone, and again, no comparison to what we do in college or what I do at women's college, but there's a process when you are an assistant coach where you've sat back on benches and watched, you've taken the good stuff that you like, but you also have your own stuff. The first time you try your own stuff, if you have to win an NBA championship or have to get to an NBA finals, that's a lot of pressure on your own stuff. And I think in Giannis's case, and I think the reason Nurse is going to continue to be a name is he saw it firsthand up close. And I think, I don't know that people talk a ton about Giannis's understanding of the game. I think he's incredible for how little he has played leading up to it. But I also think like he knows kind of what we know. Like he grew up in basketball around the last 15 years and didn't know anything beforehand. And he's seen what he's seen. And to me, they're going to have to sell him on a guy that they don't have to try to make up reasons why he might be great. And maybe obviously I'm not in the middle of it, so I don't know. But I think if you have a chance next year to get the players' attention back. That's the biggest thing that happens with a new coach. That, in my opinion, this team got really comfortable doing what they do, and they knew they were good at it. And the stuff that made them great, when you become really good, the stuff that actually made you great is the little stuff that you kind of just get sick of doing every day, and you're a little less sharp. And that's why when I look at the drop, like, to me, it's not the drop. I didn't realize, Brook Lopez didn't realize who exactly was coming off of it. So he's 2 steps too low. Or at the end of game 4, when it's Holiday and Middleton, and they're just kind of loose with their switch or loose with the high hedge, and now and Holiday backs off an extra step. And I think that's what you get back with a new coach. So you have their attention. I think there might be a great guy out there who's never done it. The risk that comes with that, of that person having to go through their growing pains of how do I use a challenge? And when's the right time for a timeout? I've watched my boss do it this way for X amount of years, but I think it should be done this way. And then you get out there and you're wrong. And I think Missoula's taken a lot of grief for how he's coached timeouts. And
he was the name. Sorry to cut you off. He was the name I was thinking of when you laid out this scenario, because that's pretty much what happened to him.
Yeah. So he's put in this, he's in that spot, and luckily maybe for them, the conference has opened up a little bit. He's not going to have an experienced team unless it's the Heat on the backside, and they may pay for some of that if they play the Heat in the conference finals, if there is an experienced coach that's done this multiple times. So to me, I just think selling veterans on it is way different. If you were someone to step into Memphis, someone who hasn't done it before, it seems hard to me to tell a team of guys that have won a championship when you walk in having never done it, that this is how we do it. And I think their opportunity now is we can get all these guys' attention back. We can get the best out of Giannis again because it's going to be different. There's going to be change. It makes practice more interesting. It makes game planning more interesting. Oh, we're going to do this different. Honestly, when I started my first job as a head coach, the years before it went so poorly, I could have told them to stand on their heads and they were ready to do it. And obviously this team has had a lot of success, but at the same time, like they want to go win it again. So they need someone who convince them that that's how it's done. And if there's someone that's been in that seat, I just think that's such an easier sell. And the problem is that's such a short list. And that's why firing a guy like Bud is hard, because there's not many better than him, regardless of what we think about rotations and the drop coverage and their half court offense. So it's a big challenge.
For sure. And it's interesting you say like the players are going to be more interested in like practice and stuff, because it's like, obviously they must feel some pressure too. Like you are not like them as the players, the coaches can only do so much. Like you as the players have to go out there and perform. They didn't perform. And because of that, Bud lost his job.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, they must be feeling some pressure too, because it's like, hey, we have to perform now. So we have to understand what this new coach is telling us. Like we have to learn this new system, because it's going to be like there's a house clearing. Like the assistant coaches are likely going to be gone. It's like an entirely new people you have to get familiar with and like sort of learn from and like figure out a new way to sort of play the game you've become accustomed to playing the last couple of years. And you have the pressure of like, man, we won a title and now we got our coach fired.
Yeah.
And so you have to go in there, you have to be extra motivated as players too, which I feel like factors into it a lot as well.
100%. I was thinking about a name that people really like. I don't think is feasible at this point from what their front office has said. Ty Lue, though, the Clippers, and not even just him specific. I think he would be a very good coach and a great option if it does come up. I'm not even that familiar with specifically what he does, but I just feel like he's certainly someone who's been there and is known as like a playoff adjuster. He's
in terms of like categorizing him, I'd say he's more of like an in-game masterful tactician rather than like a culture setter type guy.
But the thing I like and the thing I was thinking about and another trait that I hadn't really thought about probably until yesterday from the coaching perspective, there was that moment in the NBA Finals 2016 when LeBron is doing like everything and they were coming up a little short still. And Ty Lue basically took him aside and said, I need even more. And they kind of got into it. And LeBron's like, I don't have anything left to give. And Ty Lue's like, yes, you do. I think there was some expletives in there. And I just feel like if Giannis is going to be this guy, right? This guy who, when they won 2 years ago, we talked about GOAT trajectory and all this stuff, right? If he's going to be a LeBron or Michael level player, I wonder if that's almost the different coaching characteristic that the Bucks should be looking for. Like someone who is not just going to say, okay, Giannis, I'm just going to put you in this position, go. Someone who's going to get on Giannis and be like, hey, I need you to be great. Like this can't be, you can't take 7 jumpers in the fourth quarter. Like we're going to draw this up. You're going to get to the rim. Like you need to go do this. And I think for as great as the culture was with Bud, and I certainly am not saying on a personal level he did anything wrong, I also don't think he is the kind of guy who's going to be doing that stuff, at least from what we saw. And we obviously only see a limited amount. We're not in there, as you said, Brad. But I do think that kind of like lighting that fire more often, in addition to the tactical and the offensive stuff, which I am very interested in, that's something I look at too. And that I think certainly would be probably falling in line with a more experienced coach. I don't think there's going to be like a 40-year-old who's never been a coach. I love Jordi Fernandez as an assistant. I don't know if he's going to be doing that kind of stuff. But Brad, is this we talked on their last show, I'll have to link it in the description about kind of like the BS around coaching and the dumb. Is that like a trope or is that a real thing that could be beneficial?
No, I think it's a real thing. And I think that's where I didn't see this team as lazy, even when they looked like they were. I just thought they were too comfortable. And I think I think, like we said, perfect timing for the hire, and that's what they needed. They needed a culture. They needed a let's get better, and they talked about the low posts of, let's just get better every day. But it felt like they were too comfortable being who they were. They knew they were good, and I felt like we saw it last year against the Bostons, the Philadelphias, the Denvers, the games when we were like, okay, it's time to see where the Bucks are at. And they just didn't play all that well a lot of those nights. And they played a little loose and they get, Boston busted them up that one night and blew them out. And there was the games that felt to fans like, oh, here's a big game. They didn't seem ready for it. And it just felt like they were always like, we'll be fine when it comes down to it. And I do think that there was a time, and the problem for Bud was he had done such a great job establishing that we're not going to panic. We're just going to keep doing our thing. That when you want to change that, it feels forced and it feels unnatural. And the players are like, wait a minute, we've sat here for 4 years and, we've been chill. And now you're going to try to get up and bust us up. And it's not him doing anything wrong. It's just the culture which they had created, which I think helped them a lot in 2021. I think there was plenty of times where a team that's pushed hard by a coach that's always up their backside probably breaks in one of those times where they're down 2-0, but they'd already kind of established, hey, we're just going to keep getting better. We'll be fine. And that kind of, I think, helped them win a title. Now they've got to that point where I do think they need somebody that gets into a little bit and challenges their manhood and their professionalism and their competitiveness. And I thought they got punched in the mouth early in that series against Miami the first night and then lost their best player. And they started looking around like, oh, shoot, like, all this comfort that we had built up, like it's gone. We're not comfortable anymore. And then they couldn't function. And I think this is the perfect time for them to switch to somebody who will challenge them a little bit more. And like you said, it's going to be tough for a 40-year-old first-time head coach to walk into that room and start raising his voice to guys that have already won a title. And that's where I think anybody at Frank Vogel or a Nick Nurse or guys that have at least shown that they can do it have a little bit easier time of coming in and having that voice and walking in that first room and going, look, you should be embarrassed by how last year ended. We're going to make sure that doesn't happen. Here's how it's going to happen. And I do think you get back some of the attention of guys who had just kind of gotten comfortable existing and being really good NBA players, great NBA players, but probably not being totally challenged a lot with just their toughness. And we really should. It feels like with the veteran team that had already won a title, they should have handled adversity so much better in the first round, and they weren't equipped for it. And I think that somebody that can come in and regain that attention has a chance to get it right back, and that's why I think they can win a title with virtually the same roster, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. And especially because, like you mentioned, a first-time head coach not really grabbing the attention. Like we talked earlier about the Raptors, the Warriors, like bringing those guys in. Those teams already hadn't won a title. They were teams that had experienced a lot of playoff failure. They weren't teams that were like, hey, we are a championship team. We know we're a championship team. And so now we're going to...
They were closer in the position the Bucks were in when Bud came in versus now. I think that's a better... I mean, the Raptors had more success before then. They had beaten the Bucks, but it was closer to that than where Milwaukee finds itself now, for sure.
Correct. And it's such a precarious situation to be in. Like you mentioned earlier, the Joe Mazzulla hire is probably the closest proxy to what it's sort of right now. And even that Celtics team didn't win a title. They just made the finals. They didn't actually win a title.
KG and Paul Pierce and Rondo won 5 in a row, as they'll tell you. So there was that happened.
Never lost a series while healthy.
That's true.
I mean, I just want to keep emphasizing that the Celtics did not win the title.
I think
as much as I can.
Just as this is a real aside, I think the Brad Beal, John Wall Wizards had some sort of thing that was like that. They were like, we never, when Marcin Gortat was healthy, we never lost a series either, or something. I don't remember. That's just a fun step back in history. Go ahead, Rohan.
It's something for Ted Leonsis' blog or whatever he had, where he declared the new big three. He
deleted with Andre Bloch or whoever. Yeah, that's gone now. Sadly.
It's so funny, but yeah, just this coaching situation is going to be extremely tenuous and difficult for the Bucks to go through as an organization. But one thing I wanted to actually ask you about, Brad, was what did you make of really the comments that Giannis had after the series when he talked about someone had asked him about guarding Jimmy Butler, and he says I wanted to, but it's something you have to let the coach make as an adjustment out of respect. That's something that I found really interesting.
That combined with, and this was, I thought, especially noteworthy from Giannis of all people, of basically, I think somebody asked, like, did you adjust enough? And he's just like, no, we didn't adjust enough. And it was like, wow, I think that was, I think those comments didn't not have something to do with the ultimate decision made. That's for sure.
Yeah, and when I mean, John Horst talks all the time about how close him and Giannis are. So obviously, that that's a huge part of their conversation. I think the interesting part to me is that conversation wouldn't have happened just between best player and head coach. And I think to me, that's part of the comfort level that, again, I think Giannis is probably the best NBA superstar you want to coach, because you're going to get, like, we keep going back and forth between Embiid's effort and AD's effort. Like, you never have to worry about Giannis as your best player's effort. I think that, but the interesting part to me was, like, the two of you didn't sit down and talk about it beforehand. Like, and again, everything, they do things completely different at the NBA than any of the rest of us coach in college, high school, everywhere else. But it is mind-boggling to me a little bit, especially when there's a very recent history of him having that matchup in the series, having success in that matchup, and that no time in those 5 games. And I think there's a lot of reasons why they didn't put him on it. And I don't believe that if they would have done that, they would have automatically won the series. Let's chalk it. But at the same time, that they kind of admitted they didn't have the conversation, or Giannis as a great player didn't at some point go up to him and say, "Let me have him." I think that's something for a new coach to take a different approach on as well. And I thought that was the final. When that was said, we could assume it was going to happen, but I still wasn't 100% sure. With, again, the success and there's not a big gap between the best coach in the world and Bud. So to find someone better is obviously the ongoing challenge. But yeah, Rohan, the fact that conversation never happened, especially when they won a series with that's puzzling.
Yeah, and I've seen circulated a lot recently, I think probably because of this, is the reported exchange between Nick Nurse and Kawhi. Everything comes back to that Raptors team for some reason in 2019 of, basically the Nurse is saying, we're going to make adjustments, and Kawhi says, the adjustment is I'm guarding Giannis, and obviously it was history from there. It would be a much cooler moment if it wasn't the Bucks and Giannis on the other side of it. For us, still undeniably a cool exchange. But that wasn't even, that would just be something we'd need Giannis to do, right? That wasn't Nick Nurse's coaching brilliance. That was Giannis saying, hey, that was Kawhi, I should say, saying, hey, I'm going to do this. But maybe if you get someone in there who is pushing more than setting up the right template, we'll say, for Giannis, maybe that's something that would then just happen. Or that could be, that could also have been schematically done and it would have worked all the same, right? If Nurse was the one who said it, maybe he was going to say that. But I think changing that dynamic is going to be useful. Of, there should be nothing unsaid of what's going to be tried next. Like, let's try it. When we're down 2-1 or 3-1 to the 8th seed, you should probably just throw a lot out the window at that point. Right. I think the Bucks, to your point, Brad, about like just comfort and just lack of urgency. It's just, you're seeing these same, biffed rotations, not getting up to the level on time, dropping too far back. Offensively, the shot selection, we've yelled for 4 pods already, probably do 5 more before June about some of the shots taken in that series, probably 50 more times offline and online. It just wasn't there. They weren't acting. And this is what blew my mind, really. And I think I didn't have a good explanation for it until I think your points about comfort that you explained, and that's what you saw. I didn't have an explanation for like why this team that knew what it would take because they did it 2 years ago would just not look like that. They did not look like a team of guys largely that 2 years ago won 4 series. And I think there's been this stuff put out there like, oh, are they tuning out Bud? Like, did Bud lose them? I don't think so. I think that is different, and that's not really the case. But the comfort idea, I think, fits. I think that works between those things and makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, they did things so similarly for so long and saw so much success, and that's why as a head coach, like people want him to do 100 things well, and there's a dozen offenses and a handful of defenses you can run. not every coach can coach every single one of those things well. Like, just because you want to switch doesn't mean that you're either your team's equipped. Like, so there's a lot of things that got to go together. But it is hard when you've been super successful. Like, we've run the pack defense for 11 years at Oshkosh. We've won 20 games every single season. There's plenty of times when I wish we switched more or we denied passing lanes. We've been really good at the other one. So you've got to have a real leap of faith, and then you got to be willing to fail. And now they have 82 games to fail at some things. And I do wish they used 82 games more, especially when seeding has kind of proved to not matter as much. Now, we felt it did, and then again, it proved it did this year. I do wish they failed more at some things. But again, I think that we've been so good at these things. It'll start working. And like, I think the coaching change has covered up a lot of IQ issues and a lot of basketball smarts issues that the Bucks have, that maybe someone that micromanages more and is willing to take control a little bit more on the fly. Like, I thought Game 5 was lost the first 4 minutes of the fourth quarter when they went 1 for 8. Brook Lopez dribbled off his foot. Giannis took an elbow jumper and a 3. Ingles took a 1-pass transition, and they needed a point guard or a head coach to slow that down and get them into an action. And they never trusted their stuff. And I think that might be the biggest indictment on Bud. When things got bad, they didn't trust what their offense was. And that is why I think the next coach has a chance, but not having to do a lot of different things. If they can just clean up a little bit of that stuff, that they can continue to take another step forward. But they need to be able to trust their stuff late in games, and it was obvious they did not.
The great irony of this still is every ATO was gorgeous, and then they just don't use any of that stuff in late game situations, right? Like, I mean, we talked about this, Rohan. The ATOs they run are magnificent offensively. Like, they draw up the most beautiful looks, and then none of those things translated over. So just too much trusting of the players, and then just not organizing them enough. I almost, and I'll throw this to you first, Rohan. I don't know if this would be done via maybe keeping someone on staff as in the new regime, or what it would be. I wouldn't mind if we saw a lot similar defensive principles. Like, I don't need to see switching for 80 games a year. Like, especially if Brook is back. And I think at this point, Brook should just be back. Like, there's no reason Brook should not. I mean, just bring him back. He was probably their second best player in the playoffs, or maybe the best player all around. Like, Brook is still Brook, and on a 1 or 2 year deal, if you can do that, he should be back. There's no reason to make a wholesale change to defense. And even if they don't carry someone over, just watch the tape, right? And the guys know what to do, but talk about it with them. But what are your thoughts on, how much things should change under a new coach?
I mean, probably like in terms of defensively, like you mentioned, not a whole lot. I mean, we saw how successful this team has been defensively. Sure, like you mentioned, Brad, about being more engaged in terms of like, it's not necessarily the drop defense, it's how you play the drop defense and knowing your assignments and knowing the offensive personnel and how to play those specific coverages. It's not necessarily the system, it's more of like being engaged in the system. So like, especially if you have such talented defensive players on your team, like you have 3 all defense caliber guys, one guy who just finished second place in defensive player of the year, one guy who has won defensive player of the year, and one guy who's been lauded as one of the best perimeter defenders in NBA history.
Just don't watch the tape from Miami, Milwaukee.
Just burn
that one.
Burn the tape.
But outside of that tape, for sure.
What tape? I don't know what you're talking about.
There we go.
No, I unfortunately do. But in terms of defensively, like you don't have to change a whole lot. Like it's in terms of like keeping someone on the staff, like this, like the coaching staff had a lot of talented people. Like that's why Bud's coaching tree has been so successful. And that's why in the first round, you see Darvin Ham versus Taylor Jenkins. And it's just like, oh shoot, like these guys are really, really good at what they do. And they learned under Bud. Like, and that's why you see Charles Lee interviewing now for positions like just lead assistant after lead assistant after lead assistant just keeps getting hired away to like be good coaches in the NBA.
Quinn
like,
Snyder pushes Boston to 6, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I forgot about Quinn Snyder too. Yeah, exactly. So like keeping some guys on would not be it wouldn't be a terrible idea. I mean, ultimately, I think that decision would be on the new coach and how comfortable they feel with that, and not necessarily like, oh, I want my guys on the staff versus the organization saying, hey, maybe you should keep a few guys. How does that dynamic work is really interesting. But in terms of the offensive stuff, I think there does need to be some adjustments. And like you were saying, Brad and Ty, like some of the shot selection, like late in that game against Miami, it was just horrendous. And I wanted to pose this question to you, Brad, because last time you came on the pod, we talked about like the whole idea of playing random and why that's like people attaching to that as sort of like a pejorative is not the best idea, because it's like most offenses in the NBA aren't really scripted. It's more of like knowing what you need to do against these certain defensive coverages and trusting your guys to know how to do that. However, like we do see a lot of the times, like this Bucks team, they get very, very comfortable taking like outlandish shots. Like you see Giannis, like we mentioned, like taking like these pull-up jumpers late in the fourth quarter when you need to get to the rim. Drew Holiday had some of the most atrocious shot selection that I have ever seen out of a very, very talented player. And that's why I said I want him on the team. I'm not saying he shouldn't be on the team, but I don't know if he can be the starting point guard for the Milwaukee Bucks. Like he should maybe be the starting two guard for the Milwaukee Bucks. You like how in terms of like what you want to see offensively from this team going forward, how much of it is really like when it comes down to like trusting your players to like play the system and how much the players trust the system in order to enact it? How does that dynamic really play? Because we saw late in that game, they were almost like Bud gave them a lot of freedom. And that's like good. You don't want to like restrict your players because that can create like sort of tenuous relationships and like tenuous bonds. But how do you sort of manage that line when they're going out there and playing like that?
Yeah, I see it, and the random thing makes complete sense to me, like we talked about in the last pod, and not being predictable. And Taylor Jenkins was on a pod I listened to. It was actually from last offseason, using all the same vocabulary and same everything that Bud does, obviously. But for me, watching that first 4 minutes when they're up 16 and Jimmy Butler's on the bench and they have a chance to punch him out. And the biggest thing in the random was, to me, it was the players not understanding time, score, matchups, moments. It was this year especially, it felt like it was a little too much. Everyone's kind of even. If you end up open, you can shoot it. And when you get to the playoffs, like the rate of certain guys taking shots versus others probably needs to get a little more lopsided. And I felt like that run especially, again, it was an Ingles 1-pass-3. It was Lopez from 27 feet on the left wing. It was Lopez shot fake, trying to drive from the top of the key, dribbling off his feet. And I don't think it's that hard. I mean, a lot of their plays, quote unquote plays, are just one or two actions to get into their stuff. And they lost complete comfort of the Giannis and Chris Middleton pick and roll that they had in 2021. Giannis to Lopez was something that they were in that pick and roll was something they thought they could squeeze a little juice out of. But I do think it comes down a lot to point guard. And my fear with Drew Holiday, as great as he is I don't think he's a point guard. And I don't think he organizes the team extremely well. I think his shot selection shows that. I think him getting caught in the air a lot in the middle of drives, getting caught underneath the basket, having to leave his feet, being willing in big games to shoot that over the top corner fadeaway on the baseline that is kind of fun when you're playing, the Pacers on a random Wednesday.
I literally was thinking Indiana as well. I don't know why. That is a very versus
because he had 50
shot.
against the Pacers.
Yeah, but I saw that shot in Game 4. I think on that far baseline, that right baseline in Miami, and I do think a combination of having the point guard on the same page and for the Bucks, because Giannis brings the ball up so much, it doesn't ever feel like someone out there is in control. Like Chris Middleton's the only guy I ever feel like where you see the hands come up to slow things down and get the ball, and now they're going to get into an action with him. But because they rely so much on transition offense all season, and they do so well in it, they're always kind of trying to get something out of that, regardless of what the numbers situation is. And then by the time they know they don't have that, they're kind of in a, let's draw help and kick situation. And they never get super organized to get to their next thing. And I think that's someone, and Toronto's offenses were never really great in the half court once they moved on past Kawhi Leonard. So, that's one of the concerns I would have with Nick Nurse. But at the same time, I just don't think it's a huge change that they have to make. But someone's got to take control, whether it's a point guard, a coach, somebody else has got to have a little better understanding for them of what a good shot is, especially when games get tight. And that's why everyone wants to move the ball all the time. That's why sometimes just a simple pick and roll with your best player gets you a shot that you know you have a decent chance to make is good offense. And it's pretty when the ball moves around and people cut, and that would be ideal. But sometimes in the playoffs, it's Jimmy Butler getting a ball screen and shooting a 17-foot pull-up. And it's Chris Middleton getting a ball screen and shooting that elbow jumper, which I wish he would have taken at the buzzer, because that's as good a shot as they're going to get with anything that they drew up. And I think that to me is they have to have a better understanding of that. And it's disappointing because they did that in 2020.
Yeah, I'm very interested in just I want to see Giannis on both ends of these things more, and I think that's something that was just lost. You know, Giannis as a screener and roller is obviously always going to be great. Now, he's such a vertical threat. I mean, if you get him, the thing about Giannis in pick and roll, and I've believed this since like 2019 or whatever, is he doesn't even need to really get an advantage. Like if he's moving and he's just like nominally 1-on-1 against his defender, that's good enough, because normally Giannis is working like 1-on-2.5. And he still has a decent success rate. If you can get Giannis 1-on-1 with spread pick and roll all the time, and either someone is helping and there's a wide open shooter, or he's got to be defended by someone who's trying to keep up with him, you're going to win a lot. Like, that's going to be a hugely successful play. They still don't run it enough. They never really did, except for like late in 21 when Chris and Giannis were running a bunch. Sneakily, if you look at the numbers, Giannis as a pick and roll ball handler has also been very efficient over the last several years. And I would like to see more of that with Brook and just with the guards. I mean, they've done some, like there's one guy per year they like to do this with. It was Grayson this year. It's been Bryn Forbes before, of the pick and pops. I think also like spam that sometimes. And I especially think those ideas in conjunction, and I would like to see some DHOs as well. Because I think, you know, if someone is going to drop way off of Giannis, then you're going to have open space for Chris, who's comfortable with pull-up shooting, and that's going to be good looks too. So Giannis just all over in action. So I think there's a lot there that you can get. And I think generally combining that idea with mismatch hunting, which I think is another thing that was probably a fair criticism of the Bucks not doing enough in terms of, you know, you're playing the Hawks and Trae Young is just there in the corner the whole series. You know, and we talked about, hey, it'd be fun if they traded for Trae Young because there's your point guard. That's a whole different can of worms. But players like that, teams find in the playoffs. The Bucks didn't do that enough. So, you know, whoever the worst defender is, let's get them in a screen with Giannis on one side or another 20 times in a row, right? Or until they pull them, and just keep beating that. Whereas the Bucks, I felt like they would make it a lot harder than it had to be. They would go up against the premier defenders. They would go, Giannis goes into the whole zone, right? Giannis goes into the barrier. And I think changing that, finding those mismatches, I think even if they don't make a significant talent upgrade, they'll look like a much better offensive team, because I kind of think they've been playing on hard mode a lot of the time when it could just be easier for them. And I hope, as you said, Brad, you know, we're here talking about this. Brad is very smart. Rohan and I are not as smart as any head coaching candidate. If we're here talking about this stuff, I would think that whoever the Bucks bring in is also going to realize offense has kind of been a problem, and there are easy ways to do that. Hopefully it doesn't even take an offensive savant, right, to maybe make some of those tweaks to the system.
Yeah,
especially. Sorry, I was going to say, I think that there was a point where they accepted an open shot as equal across the board. If it was open for Brook, open for Connaughton, open for whoever, and to me they're just levels. And like you said, I think for them to hunt some mismatches, to get into some simple action where, you know, here's your three options, and do a little bit better tiering of what is actually, just because we come down in transition and we get Javon Carter an open kick out on this, is that just because it's open as good a shot as if we run a DHO and now we've got Middleton turning the corner on it? And I do think a new coach will come in with a little different perspective on that. And one of the fears when you shoot that many threes is if you bog it down and run a bunch of actions, you start taking rhythm away because the ball's not moving or we're not playing this open space. And I think that'll be the challenge of whoever comes in next, is trying to marry a little bit of those two.
Yeah, it's more of like a let it fly, but let it smartly fly.
Yeah.
Something like let's let the smart shots fly. How about that?
Yeah.
Instead of like the first open shot, because it's like that gets a lot of, I think that's a big thing of the regular season versus playoffs thing, because a lot of the regular season, it comes down to like how many possessions can you get in a game. Like if you win the possession battle in the regular season, more than likely you're going to win the game overall.
Yeah.
And that's why you see the teams that just play fast win a lot of regular season games. This also kind of struggle in the playoffs. Like I guess it's a little. I mean, they were a very good team and could have won. The Kings, like they were a very like offensive like heavy team. They were a team that was like, yeah, we're going to run and gun. We are going to win this possession battle. We're going to get like so many more, like 125 possessions a game or something like that. And then when it comes down to the playoffs, like it slows down. And given, like, I'm not trying to disrespect the Kings. They were very, very good. They almost beat the reigning champs. But like it comes down, they slow it down. Then you rely a lot on De'Aaron Fox and his shot making. Like it comes down to, and that's why you see a guy like Domantas Sabonis really, really struggle in that series. But they still had a chance because of De'Aaron Fox. Like in the playoffs, it's not necessarily about winning the possession battle because every single possession is a grind. Every single possession, you're getting a locked-in version of the opposing team's defense, and you have to lock in on every single defensive possession. So when you're getting, like, you can afford to take more, like, the first open shot in the regular season because you're getting more possessions per game versus you have to, like, adjust the quality of those shots when it comes down to the postseason because they matter so much more.
Yeah, I think they could almost run the same offense that they have been for the first 3 quarters of every game in the regular season next year, and I'd be fine. Like, I think the fourth quarter in the playoffs is when it should change. Like, I almost think, like Bud did, it was pretty rudimentary at first, right? Like, they had the boxes, right? Like, this is where you're going to stand to open up the floor. This is where you're going to shoot. And I wouldn't really like to see the exact same offense for 75% of the regular season. But if it was like literally we're going to play one style of offense in quarters 1 through 3 every game, and then in the fourth quarter, we're going to be a lot more diligent and we're going to hunt the matchups more and everything else to get in that zone, like I wouldn't even mind that kind of idea because I do think, to your point, Rohan, it just changes. I mean, the regular season, it's 82 games times 48 minutes, and it's really, you can let the math play out, right? Like if you're, the mid-range shots over the course of that many minutes, they're not going to fall at a high enough clip, and we will win a lot of basketball games. And on the flip side, if Javon Carter takes however many threes a game, and not just, Javon's a good player, not just him, all the guys, right? Grayson and Brooke and everyone else, if we get these shots this many times, it's like literal, you can moneyball it. And like, yeah, you're going to win a lot of ball games. In the playoffs, you just can't weather the 2 games where things go poorly. It doesn't work. And that's I think something the Bucks have run into both offensively and defensively of, our shooters went cold for 3 straight games. We don't have a good enough pivot and we lose. Or defensively, like, we don't really have a better way to cover mid-range guys. We're not used to doing it. And Jimmy or Kawhi or whoever. And to your point, Brad, at a certain point, like you just lose because the other guy is better. And there's no real shame in that. And I don't think there was any defensive coverage that was going to make Jimmy Butler turn into a pumpkin after the series he had. He was just too damn good. But I do think there needs to be a little bit of a reevaluation, at least in the big moments, the crunch time, the playoffs, of we can't just play the math because we don't have to. We have one of the 5 guys or however many guys, especially if there's no Giannis, and I wonder how much Bud's experience in Atlanta plays into this. If they didn't have a choice, they couldn't just say, all right, Jeff Teague, Al Horford pick and roll 40 straight times. You're not winning 60 games doing that. They had to have this system. And obviously they weren't going to get over the hump either way because you need the great player. They still were great teams and won a lot. But I think the Bucks need to shift more toward let's just make it so Giannis is able to beat the other team versus trying to rely on the math and the offense and all of these other things.
And it goes back to the big picture. Part of the reason their culture is so good is because guys 5 through 12, 5 through 15 are more elevated here on a team with a big-time superstar and 2 or 3 all-stars than they are other places because they could take those shots. And the payoff that I feel bad that Bud didn't get is he should have been paid off by those guys playing better in the playoffs because he put so much trust in them. And he elevated those guys and gave them more green lights than other people would have, more playing time in season than other people would have because the way he balanced starter minutes. And I think the thought is, I'm going to show all this trust. And when it really comes down to it, they're going to play well because they feel good. They know that we trust them. They know that Giannis will get them the ball when they're open. And other than 2021, those role players didn't do a great job paying off that trust. And again, I think that there's the things that the Bucks were good at, transition offense and Giannis getting into space, are two of the easier things I think you can take away in a playoff setting. Transition, you can not crash the boards. You can really lock in on live ball turnovers and making sure you don't turn the ball over, which offensively for a team like the Heat means playing slow and making sure you get a shot. So it becomes easier to take away their best thing. And then if you're not giving up transition, you have more time to jam the lane up. So you have to have more seasoning in your offense, and you have to have more double actions. And the reality is there's probably some of it was I didn't feel like they had a high IQ team. So maybe some of these things, they just weren't confident in trying to, let's get the ball off the floor. No, we don't get it. How do we get that mismatch? And because they had 5 out spacing or 4 out with the dunker spot, they weren't ready to just go set a ball screen that gets the switch that you want or run the action that gets the next one. So there will have to be, if they do want to play more like that, they are going to have a tweak. And I agree. I don't think they can make big changes. This team is built to play well at the way they were playing, but those type of things they've got to do better because they have to have something with 5 minutes to go that they know they can get a basket in. And it was obvious the last 2 games of that series, they did not trust anything that they had to get a basket.
When it comes down to of course, 100% agree. When it comes down to where do we go from here? Like as the title says, how can the Bucks get better after firing Mike Budenholzer? We've talked a lot. It's going to be difficult. Would you say that the Bucks, we talked about a bunch of different potential candidates who already have head coaching experience, like Nick Nurse, like Ty Lue, like potentially Steve Kerr, if things go awry for the Vogel. Would you say because in my opinion, guys like Steve Kerr, guys like Frank Vogel are more like culture guys, and guys like Nick Nurse, Ty Lue are more like in-game sort of like tacticians. Would you say that this Bucks current culture, because of the roster, because of how much they've been together, are strong enough where they don't necessarily need a culture guy? They could go from a culture guy, but who is obviously one of the smartest basketball minds ever. Let me be clear. When I say culture guy, I'm not saying they don't know how to make in-game tactical decisions.
It's like the floor raiser thing. These things can be true without being the pejorative people make them out to be, right?
Exactly.
There's a line there, and I think especially on social media discourse, things are just so simplified by many. Rohan, you're absolutely right in what you're saying, I think too, but it doesn't mean it's a negative or saying that they're terrible at everything else.
Yeah, it means what is your strength? What is your main strength out there? Would you say, Brad, you would go more for a guy who was more of a culture setter or more of a tactician?
I think that, and I want to say fear because I think the players understand they need to be better. My fear from having a coaching change is that so much blame goes to the coach that they're not seeing their own faults in it. But I do believe the players probably believe they need more adjustments. And I think now as a more veteran team, their culture is kind of established. I don't think that's a priority for the new person coming in. Now, it will be interesting if they do bring in someone like Nick Nurse, who's gotten after players in press conferences like that.
Yeah,
that hasn't happened since. Jason Kidd had some of that, but it's been a while since
George Karl
coach go into a press conference and say anything really meaningful, but definitely nothing negative towards players. So that, I do think that's a fear. And I think the biggest thing, you don't get to just bring all the good stuff that you were doing and have that keep moving. And now you only have to tweak the others. There's a ton of risk in losing a lot of the good stuff. But I think the players probably think they need more adjustments and more in-game stuff, which is why I would say that they will be looking for someone, again, that's just an easier sell. And I think, the other names you're talking about, I think have enough respect where it probably doesn't matter if a guy like Steve Kerr is available after this series for some reason, that whatever his strength is, he's won enough that they'll listen to whatever. But and those guys, again, they don't know how to coach everything, but they can coach many different things really well. But I do think the players are probably convinced they needed more of that. So if that's the strength of the new person, I think the culture stuff definitely becomes the second piece of that. And again, with a veteran team, with your best player being who he is and how he carries himself, they shouldn't have to worry about culture as much.
Out of all the names out there, and I know, we've chatted about a couple off the pod as well, Brad, is there anyone that stands out to you? I think Kenny Atkinson is available. He's been a head coach. He's not been a championship, but he's been the head seat. Is there anyone so far that you've kind of thought that I think is a better option than most of the others? I know it's a little difficult because a lot of the guys that we've talked about who have been there are seen as, I think, more defensive than offensive minds, which does make it a little complicated. Maybe can you offset that with a certain assistant? Who knows? I mean, I certainly won't pretend to know all of the available assistants and who could make sense there. I guess one that we haven't talked about much, I don't know if he's looking to coach again, Mike D'Antoni, certainly not a defensive-minded guy. He's been in several head chairs. I don't know if that's the direction they would go. Who knows? But are there any names that have stood out to you so far?
I mean, I won't pretend to know enough about all of them individually of what their true strengths are. But again, I do think Nurse, Vogel, I think all those guys are known as defensive guys. I would worry about Nick Nurse and what their offense would look like. But at the same time, I just think Giannis has seen Nick Nurse up close and took an L to him. Obviously, they went and won a title. And I don't think the list of who they can hire to coach Giannis, while it's the best job available, the actual guys that fit who he would want, but also guys that team would. I don't think it's a very long list. And I think because Nurse has done it in front of his face, I think he's a major favorite on the betting boards right now. I think it was like -300 to be the Bucks' next coach, wherever I saw it, with no one else even close to even money. So I just think he's a guy who's shown he'll mess around defensively. And again, it may not matter, honestly. It matters who it is. It may not matter what the new guy does as much as we're talking about right now, because if they just get better at, like Rohan said before, just get better at what they're doing, because they've got a new voice, they've got new attention, practice is different, the trips are a little bit different. That was my biggest fear about They couldn't bring back Bud because every post game that they lost was going to be questions about adjustments and coaching. And so they get a freshness to that. And, to me, Nick Nurse is the guy that I would think they would end up hiring because they saw it firsthand. And I just think for John Horst, this is John Horst's last head coaching hiring if it doesn't go well. And I think he would be the guy that, if I'm John Horst, I'm gonna get a guy that I know has done it and isn't gonna try to prove it. Now, I think it'd be real gutsy of him to go grab someone that hasn't done it. But I don't know. If this guy doesn't do well, do you see John Horst getting to hire another head coach? I would say no. So I think the combination of him and Giannis and needing that, to me, is probably, you got to go with a guy that's proven he can do it.
For sure. And like a guy like Nick Nurse, for sure, is a guy who's done it. One thing I would be a little trepidatious about when it comes to Nick Nurse is there's been a lot of sort of friction between him and his players recently about like, hey, this guy's kind of running us into the ground. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, he's played a ton of minutes on those guys, and I'd like to think that the Bucks are built better to be able to absorb more bench minutes, and I would assume that would be a conversation. But I think we would all probably agree maybe they need to play more in the regular season so that they are a little more minute and battle tested when it gets to the playoffs. But yeah, the last year was not an endorsement of Nick Nurse as a player's coach for sure. But again, like we talked about before, that might be what they need. They might need someone that's a little more abrasive, that challenges a little bit more, and that when things get uncomfortable, rather than telling everyone to relax, tells everyone that we need to get after it a little bit more. So I don't know that he's even the best person out there. I just think that's the guy they're going to end up landing on because it fits so many pieces of where this team is at, who their best player is, and kind of what the risks are going forward. They need this to go well, and I think it's just hard to make too big of a gamble.
What do you think of his hats?
And would you do merch? Would you ever have merch if you could?
Oh my God, no. Oh my God. My wife is incredibly skilled in the style world, and I would be so terrified of doing it wrong that no. And I mean, for a players' league, I think the players have gotten off the hook a little bit here with how bad that series went. So they might. That might be exactly what they might need a little bit of that, because it'll be the last run for a lot of these guys. If it doesn't go well next year with the new guy, people will be going out the door, and it's going to be a completely different iteration of the Bucks. So there's a ton of pressure on this team next year. And the problem is we don't know until April whether or not it's any good, and they know that too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be a remarkable regular. We're going to learn a lot next regular season. I think it's going to be really one of the most fascinating we've had. But there is certainly going to be, going into the playoffs, a sense of like, okay, that was all great. Let's see what the real results are now, right? Like let's see the games that I think the regular season does matter. It's a topic every year. I watch the games. I learn a lot about the team. I really enjoy the regular season. Like I think if you like watching basketball, it matters enough. Is my take on that, but. You know, when you're in this position as a team, I think the Bucks are one of like 5 teams in a spot of where it matters, but what comes next matters a lot more. And I think that's how it should be. I think there'd be a problem if it was as equal to the playoffs, right? Like that's the point of it. My other thought is I wonder if they would go with someone who is coaching overseas right now. I mean, someone like Etoile Messina, like someone like that. Who knows? I mean, we're just throwing out names now. I don't even know if we're going to get like a list of interviews anytime soon. I mean, I think they want to see how the playoffs go. It's certainly what it sounded like from Woj's reporting on the subject, and who else may spring loose. As long as that doesn't mean Doc Rivers or Joe Mazzulla, that's interesting enough. But if it means one of those guys, it's much less interesting to me. I wish Vogel was known as an offensive guy, because I like a lot about what Frank Vogel does, and I think he's a great coach. I almost wonder, is he too Budenholzer-y? Like I do look at him as kind of like a, strong culture, defensive first, like defensive principles. I would be interested. I think the interviews should be the most important thing, and the ideas that these guys bring, and potentially women with Becky Hammon or other candidates, but that these people bring for what they want to do. Like I think that is what should matter most, and that's what we won't know about until they pick someone and they do a press conference. But it's going to be fascinating to see who they pick. I am not sold on Nurse, but I think the logic you laid out does make sense in terms of, it's really risky to bring in someone who hasn't done it before. And both in terms of, if you take the big picture, like to this era of the Bucks, the smaller picture, John Horst's job. Like it's, if you hire a first year guy and he's horrible, that's a pretty bad sign for the future. So, it's a huge flashbulb moment. Honestly, it's a great opportunity to turn things around, but there is huge risk there as well. It's going to be a really meaningful process, and I'm both excited and terrified to see where it goes.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, and I'm now that I've had to talk about Nick Nurse, I'm going to pull up. Luckily, we have access to the synergy clips. I'm going to pull up their offense this week and try to figure out if it's, because we talk about all these things. They only get to coach the teams that they have.
Right.
So that team switches a lot, but they've got all these switchy 6'9" wings.
Yeah, they had no centers. They had to.
They have no centers. Like their best scorer, I guess, was Van Vliet in the last couple of years. Siakam maybe didn't get a whole lot better, but they're all completely different personnel wise. So who the heck? I mean, he's not running an offense that would be set for Giannis without Giannis. So I think, like you said, all these conversations for us to even go look at what they're doing, what he was doing offensively, as soon as you get Giannis and Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez, it's a completely different offense than Siakam and Van Vliet and Norm Powell or whoever they have.
Anunoby, yeah.
Yeah, so to even watch what they've done with these other teams, like you probably can't even pick up that much to try to bleed over the Bucks anyway. So it is about their ideas and what they wish they could probably do with the teams they had. And again, it's such a risky spot for John Horst to go. But at the same time, I think he's proven to be a guy I don't know that he works with a lot of fear. I think his move, he wasn't afraid to give up a lot to get Drew Holiday. So, as much as I think they'll go get Nick Nurse, like if he thinks someone is better and obviously, they looked overseas the last time before they hired Budenholzer. Like, I don't think he's afraid to do it. I would be real nervous if this was potentially my last shot to hire a coach, to do it with someone that hasn't proven it. So.
Yeah, one last interesting Nurse note. He was seen as the offensive assistant for Dwayne Casey before he was brought on, and then hasn't really. So it is going to be, if he is hired, I think your point is great. Like, the Raptors and the Bucks, I think both have relatively unique rosters and skill sets of players. So I wouldn't expect it to be all of the same things he was doing with that core brought over to this one. I would certainly hope not. That it'd be a pretty bad hire if that's his plan.
Right. It's not like Phil Jackson running the triangle with whoever he had. Like, Nick Nurse doesn't have an offense.
Right.
So he's going to run, and most of these guys are going to run the best thing that they think. And like I said, Budenholzer came in the perfect time, ran the perfect spacing offense, made the adjustment in 2021 to add the dunker spot. And now they need someone who I think can take pieces of that and add a little seasoning and some of those actions. And again, it might not be as complicated as we're acting like it'll be. And I think any of these guys that have been doing it for the last 30 to 40 years of their life, 25 years, whatever, are well equipped to take care of some of those things that they haven't been great at.
For sure. It's a major inflection point for the franchise. It's one of the biggest moments in franchise history, truly. Yeah. It's going to be really interesting to see who they hire. Brad, I know you mentioned Nick Nurse is your favorite. My favorite is probably unfeasible, and that's Becky Hammon. Just seeing what she did with the Aces in the year. It's just like that sort of revitalization of an offense would be really, really helpful for the Bucks. However, I don't think she's interested.
She has said she's not, for sure.
Yeah.
Not in the Bucks specifically.
Did she not interview for the Raptors, though?
This year?
Yeah.
I thought she said she doesn't want to make the jump, but maybe that's an old quote that I saw. I could be wrong.
I think they requested permission at least.
Okay.
And were granted it. But I'm not sure if an actual interview took place. It'll be interesting.
She was vague about it. The Raptors requested an interview. She made a comment about not wanting to take away. It was right when, because WNBA training camps just started, and it was a comment to the effect of, I don't want to take the attention away from these guys and talk about the Raptors. But it wasn't a no.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
The timing-wise problem is their season just started.
Right.
So they're in a different cycle, and she would have to walk away. Not that she wouldn't, but she would have to walk away from the team at the start of the season that is well equipped to win another championship.
Yeah.
And obviously is, if not the best coach in women's pro history, she's in the conversation. So, but yeah, Becky's great. I would love. I mean, obviously, as a women's basketball coach, if the first female coach would be at the Bucks, it'd be fantastic. I just think the risk that comes with it for John Horst would probably be a tough step to take.
I also think she would command the respect of the Bucks locker room as well.
Oh yeah,
absolutely, undeniable resume. Just absolutely a winner at every single level. But Ty, who's your favorite?
I'm going to have to reevaluate. I need to dig into some of the established guys who are available. I've been talking about Jordi Fernandez. I talked to a buddy who covers the Cavs and Charge, and apparently he's just seen as an offensive savant. But now I'm wondering, is that level of offensive guy even needed at this moment? Or is it more important to bring in someone who's going to have more gravitas right away? So I feel like I need to reevaluate. That's been the name. I'll say that name to satisfy your question, Rohan, and to give a real answer. But I am kind of getting drawn to more of the proven guys. I don't think there's one candidate right now of the currently available pool that I go, that is the perfect hire. That is no doubt checks every single box, which makes it difficult. The Clippers said they're going to keep Ty Lue. If he ends up available, I think he would probably rocket up my list pretty quickly. Probably same with Kerr. I'd be more excited about Lue. But out of the currently available candidates, I think Nurse is fine. I would have to hear that they were blown away by what he said and kind of hear that from them. But that's going to be the case with any coach. Like I said, I really do trust John Horst and the Bucks front office enough that whoever they announce, unless it's Mark Jackson, I guess I was going to say no disrespect. I guess it's kind of unavoidably disrespectful.
Take the disrespect, Mark. We're calling you out here.
I mean, He said some wild things on broadcast. I feel like it's not even close to evening out some of the disrespect he is dishing. Anyway, but unless it's something like a name like that, it's that doesn't even make sense. I feel like I'll be on board until I have a reason not to be, because you have to assume like, they're not going to take it lightly. Like it's going to be a big time search. And as Horst said in the press conference interview thing, it's the most desirable open job, right? I mean, unless maybe Golden State opens up and that's different and, they paid $10 billion to someone. But outside of a situation like that, getting to coach Giannis and this team, they should kind of have their pick of options. So you have to assume they're going to bring in someone who's at least solid, if not much better.
Yeah, it'll turn out. I think it's going to turn out well for them. It's timing is good. I think where they're at is good. I think there's a handful of guys, just a new voice will just resharpen the axe a little bit for them. And to me, that's honestly all they need. I think most of this roster can return with the new coach and have a really good chance to win a championship.
For sure. Maybe not Doc Rivers, though, because as we're recording, the Sixers have blown a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter. So
no, not him.
Yeah, not. We put him on the Mark Jackson list. Brad, we've taken up a ton of your time. Thank you so much. I did want, before Rohan spools up the outro, and we talked about him not doing pod random as the last thing anymore. If he hasn't come up with something, he's got like a couple more minutes to right now. But Brad, I know season ended recently. I'm guessing you're in recruiting right now, but would just love to hear about your team and where you're at and expectations for the next season. And I would really encourage anyone located in the Fox Valley or who goes around when the season does start up to make a trip and catch a game, because it is really fun, and not just because watching you go ballistic when you're up 35 in the fourth quarter and someone blows a switch or something. The whole game experience is fun, and it's a really talented level of basketball that I think people probably wouldn't appreciate unless they saw it. But when they do see it, they go, "Oh, the skill level here is really high, and this is an incredibly entertaining game to watch."
Yeah, women's basketball over the last 5 years has skyrocketed. I mean, the level of talent, athleticism, skill that is. I mean, we're now going into our third generation of women's basketball players. 50 years since Title IX, so now girls have grandmas that played for the first time, and people don't understand how big a deal that is. Like when we grew up, and when I grew up, like my grandpa played basketball, my dad played his whole life, and that's not how girls and females had it previously. So we're gonna have a really good team. We have a ton of girls back. We went to the second round of the NCAA tournament last year with half a team of freshmen. So we returned 15 of our 17 players from last year. And we're actually going to have the majority of those for the next 2 years. So we think we'll be a top 25 team when the year starts. And I think we've got a chance over the next 2 years to make a run in the Final Four and play for a national championship. So we're trying to get over the hump. We are between the portal and recruiting right now. We're super active, and the portal works for Division III as much as it does for everyone else. We're not getting the players LSU women are getting over the last couple of days, but we're talking to good players because we've had a really good program. So it's a great time for basketball in my world. It's a fun time for me to watch the NBA and be recruiting and thinking about our future too. So I had a blast, guys. I'll be breaking down NBA film. So as soon as I hire a coach, I'll send you some clips you can use on here. And,
yeah, please.
We'll see a little more seasoning that the Bucks can be playing well past the end of April next year.
And everyone, I forgot to include this as part of the plug. Follow Brad on Twitter at UWO Coach Fischer. Maybe as many, if not more, Bucks tweets than Titans tweets. So I think that's like, probably more fun.
I'd rather talk about the Bucks than our own.
Yeah, probably more fun and more strategic to share that insight versus the others. But
for sure. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. And Ty, I think I did decide. I think I'm going to decide to keep Pod Random in honor of Bud until like a new coach has been hired.
I like that.
So got to keep that. So with that, thank you again, Brad, for joining us.
Sure.
Thank you everyone for listening. Make sure you check out gspn.info for all of your GSPN pod needs. Packers, Bucks, Brewers, pop culture, anything you need. Our Substack link, our merch link, not Nick Nurse merch, but our merch is on gspn.info. Make sure you check that out, and make sure you subscribe to wherever you're listening to this, watching this. Leave a 5-star rating and review. Pod Random, and we will talk to you next time.